and tricks and some of the things I've learned along the way. So the first thing is like, hey, great, you got a new job, you got a new project, you got this great thing going on, you've got a change. And that's why, what I've talked about is jobs, your roles change. You may move from maybe a junior developer to a mid-level or mid-level to senior, or you move from project A to project B. Maybe somebody leaves, somebody retires, somebody changes jobs. There's a restructuring of the company. All of that kind of stuff could roll into there's some sort of handoff or requirement to learn a new environment or new code. Well, the first thing you do when this happens is, you got to think of this as it's a journey. And so as any journey, you got to figure out where are you? And of course, where are you going to go? And if you haven't figured those two things out, your journey is going to be really interesting. So you start at A, you're going to say point Z, and now when you find those 2 points, well, the next thing you got to do is you're going to try to fill in how am I going to get from A to B to C all the way out to point Z. So the first step, where am I? What is it? What's the situation that I've walked into? And this may seem oversimplistic, but I've definitely run into situations where these answers are not what you would expect. One of the first things is, again, we're focusing on sort of a developer point of view. First thing you want to do is, hey, is there even source code available for the thing that I'm working on? You would think that that's always true. It is not. I've been in multiple situations over the years where I've been asked to essentially redesign from scratch something that was written in, like maybe it was written in for DOS, and it's an old DOS app, and they don't have any of the source code. They don't know what the language was. They don't know what the data structures were, things like that. Or it may be a situation where you've got a consultant or a provider or outsourcer of some sort that they don't want them to know that you're in there. They don't want to know, or there's some, legal or contractual constraints around being able to access the actual source code, or they just may not give you, proper access to it. So you got to figure out if that's available. Is documentation available? Is usually the next step. It's like, okay, let's assume I can find the source, and actually even whether I can or not, is there any kind of documentation? And by this, it's like, it's not just technical documentation like build scripts and things like that, but it's also like, are there user manuals? Are there guides? Are there administrator guides? Are there requirements documents? Is there anything other than the application itself that tells me what it's supposed to do and how it's supposed to work? And again, you'd be amazed at how many different convoluted ways that this thing could occur. Sometimes you don't have any requirements. We had an application that there were no requirements. There was the user guide was like a page, and we ended up just, when we wanted to get it upgraded and migrated from a desktop to a mobile application, we just said, here's the application, assume it is the requirements. And that's got challenges in itself because it was not actually, the way it worked is not really how we want it to work. It had some bugs, so you got to work through that. And that's part of figuring out where you're at is, how defined is the problem you're working on? And along the same lines of documentation is training. Is there, do you have trainers that train people on using this application? Do you have videos? Do you have audio or anything like that that would be, essentially like an introduction to the application? Maybe a user manual, but sometimes there is no user manual, but there is maybe an onboarding process that at least has some intelligence about the application that you could learn. Which again, in those kind of cases, it is worth your time to spend time with that training, and that includes if none of this stuff exists, it may be that it's in people's heads. So maybe you've got, like, for example, a help desk application that you've got to support, that you've got to maintain, and there's people using it, in the company, they're actively using it. There's no real documentation. Sometimes the best thing to do is just go ride shotgun with somebody on the help desk for a couple hours or a day or whatever it is, figure out how they use it, figure out what the typical usage patterns and features are. And that may get you a long way towards figuring out what have we got? What is it that I'm starting with? And of course, with all of this, you probably know it if you've got the source code, but what are the primary technologies and the platform? This often, these days, is actually a little less clear than it may have been in the past. In the past, you were a desktop application or a client-server application. Well, now you may have stuff in a cloud, and it may be there's development servers that are maybe AWS Linux, but if you go to production, they're actually like Red Hat or something like that. There's some other distribution of it, or maybe it's your development environment maybe is using the one of the lightweight Tomcat or Apache or something like that. But when you move up to production, it's actually an app server of, WebSphere or one of those kind of things. That's a higher end tool. So figure out what those players are. And again, just same thing, source code plus database. You never know. Maybe you're MySQL in one way, and then they move it up to SQL Server is actually the deployment technology. It's not often that happens, but you do need to figure out what the technologies are that are involved, and particularly like frameworks and things like that, because it can really impact what you need to know about where you're at. If you're, let's say you're an Angular expert and you have an Angular app, that's great. But if you're looking at it and you find out that, oh, wait, it's all written in React, it's like, uh-oh, now I got to go learn React. That's part of the figuring out where I'm at. And we're not done yet. So, moving along with this, where am I? Well, who are the primary users? Like the desktop application I talked about, if it's a help desk desktop application, it's the help desk staff. You may or may not know that, may or may not be obvious, but that's definitely one of the things you need to know is who's actually using this thing, which along the same line, is this even in production? Is anybody using this? Because obviously that dramatically changes what you can and can't do as far as maintenance is concerned. If it's not in production, then there's a lot of changes you can make. If it's in production, that may dramatically restrict the kind of stuff you can do, because any change is probably going to have some sort of migration or something like that. At the very least, a notification that needs to go out to whoever the primary users are, or secondary or tertiary users as well. You want to get into this, getting a little beyond what your, like let's for say, we'll call them a junior to mid-level developer is going to do. But this is where you want to, and figure out where you are. You don't need to know just the technology. You really need to know the why of the solution that you're working with, of the application. You need to really understand what it is and what it's supposed to do and how well it does it. So you need to understand, look at the strengths and weaknesses of the application. What problem does this solve? Those two go hand in hand, as you need to really figure out what is this supposed to do. You're going to get a lot of that information probably from the primary users. Hopefully they're on the same page as the key decision makers and stakeholders and those kind of people. They're hopefully all going to tell you essentially the same story of, this is the problem we've got to solve, or the problems that this thing solves. This is how it does it. And find out how does it do this well? How does the application, the solution, solve these problems well? Where is it that it maybe needs some help? Because those, of course, are going to dramatically impact any kind of maintenance and changes that you can make, and even road mapping kind of stuff. So if you're looking at features to add, you probably want to eliminate some of the weaknesses, especially if they're weaknesses that are very painful to the users, versus maybe highlighting the strengths. You may not want to put much effort into those, because you honestly may not get the same bang for your buck. So still, before we even moved, we're getting just trying to figure out our bearings here still. Any kind of things like this, this is something that I've found usually after, it's one of those things you smack yourself on the head after something's come up. And it's like, get the emails and the phone numbers, the contact information you need to of the people that are involved in the project. If there's any like chat or Slack or anything like that, get the user IDs or session IDs or whatever you need to do, or the memberships that you need to, so that you are a part of that community, basically. Make sure there's, if there's any processes or procedures or coding standards that are involved in this, make sure you have that kind of stuff. It's usually as simple as just asking the question and say, hey, yeah, are there some coding standards I need to refer to? And this goes back to documentation to some extent, but there may be some undocumented things like that. And we'll get a little further into how those things will manifest themselves here as we go into this. You basically got I know where I am. Okay, I'm going to start. This is like I'm taking my first step in my journey towards mastering this thing. Usually the first thing you want to do is check out or get the source code, however it is. If you don't have it, if it's not in version control, get it into version control. First thing you want to do, once you get it, put it into version control somewhere so that you've got a baseline that's hey, this is where I started. And then you can start messing around with it. You can track your changes. You can do all of that kind of stuff. Because whether they use source code or not, that's one of the things you need to. So, I mean, whether they use a version control or a repository or not, you need to do it. So just get into that habit if it's not already there. Once you've checked it out, you take the steps to get this thing working, which is basically get yourself a development environment put together. You got the source, and now you got to build it. So figure out what the IDEs are, what the libraries are, what any of the requirements and prerequisites are. Get those things put together. Start building your environment out. You should be able to run your unit tests if they exist. Not only run that, not just like run it like if you're using a JUnit and one of the nice little, feedback kind of mechanisms you'll get. Take a look at the test results as well. I mean, hopefully they're all going to be successful. But you do want to take a look at what is it that they're testing. There may be some things there, particularly when you're if there's no test, you know that, okay, there's no test. But if they have some, it's not uncommon for them to be very spotty. It's like maybe somebody came in for a little bit, had some time, and created a few tests, and then that was it, and then they never did it again. Get a feel for what exists, because they may actually be effectively useless. If it's only a few tests, but there's actually thousands and thousands of tests that should be run, then effectively what you have is nothing. If there's if there's anything beyond that, get a feel for what the coverage is, what are the kinds of things that they've been verifying, and it's one of those things that's just a part of really understanding what it is that you're going to be working with. Ideally, if you've checked it out, you want to be able to do your build from version control. You want to set the stuff up so that if I save it and I commit I tag it, whatever I need to do, that I can build from that, or at least I have that process put together, and ideally, it's scripted. At first, you don't need to script it, just let's get it done manually. But hopefully that's there somewhere where there's some scripting so that you've got those, you can kick them off and it will build from version control. Assuming all of that works, that you can run your tests and they pass, you can build and it builds correctly. Let's deploy that app and see if it works, and start smoke testing it. Go through, hopefully at this point, since you know where you are, you should have spent enough time that you know what is the general usage, what generally happens. Is it somebody logs in and then they jump to page A and then B and then C? What is that general path? Let's go ahead and use that and smoke test your application to make sure that at this point, that means you should have pulled it from source code, built it properly, and it actually runs. And as we're moving forward, there's some things that we've got to deal with our destination as well. Clarify who's on the team. Who is it that I'm integrating with, that I'm communicating with, and whether this is the implementation team or the end users or the stakeholders. Who's involved in this stuff? Because if I need to put a notification out to everybody that, oh, by the way, we have a new release, I need to know how that works. Confirm, figure out who's what, where, why, how, when, and all of that. Who's doing what are their roles, what are the expectations, particularly for yourself. Okay, I think I've got this. What defines me getting my job done. Hopefully you sort of know this already, but this is sort of on that checklist of let's make sure we've got that. Who are the support staff, if there are any? So if I don't directly do a build, for example, if I don't push it to QA and I don't push it to production, who are the people that do that? Who are the people that are, if there's a help desk for this application, who are the people doing that? Who are the people that are, managing those tickets? Let's make sure we know all the players. Again, who are the key stakeholders? This is critical in a lot of cases. Is the stakeholders and the key decision makers is find out who those people are and verify it. It may be on an org chart, it may not be. You may have to actually figure this out yourself a little bit through maybe like team meetings and things like that. Is figure out who is it at the end of the day that if I have to have somebody make a decision, who do I need to go to that can do that and that it will stick. Are there SMEs, are there subject matter experts available that I can talk to and then what's their availability? It's how often can I integrate with these people? And this goes back to expectations. How often should I be talking to these people? Should it be something where I'm, maybe doing a weekly status meeting or update with the subject matter experts that I'm, maybe they expect that I'm regularly doing a couple updates to this site and, this application, and they want to see those and they want to talk through them. Or is it a monthly thing, or it may even be like quarterly or annual or something like that. Depends on what the scope of your application is. You don't want to wear those people out, but you also want to make sure that you're utilizing them, as much as you can. So it's finding those expectations and making sure that you get the best use out of them without, like I said, sort of ticking them off or wearing them out. So looking, going from A to Z, we're trying to figure out what that Z is. What's that last step? Where do I need to take this thing? Well, sort of along with these prior lines we've talked about is what's the expected schedule? If I'm supposed to go from A to Z, when am I supposed to be at Z? Am I supposed to, if I've got a bunch of issues going on, am I supposed to have those things done by the end of the week, the end of the month, the end of the year? Is there some sort of a release schedule that I need to stick to? Or are we going to do, all this stuff has to be done in 12 months, but we're going to do maybe monthly releases? Are we agile or waterfall? Do we have sprints? If we do, how long are they? What does a typical sprint look like? How do they break down the various stages within that sprint, design and implementation and testing? How does the team, actually do like the day-to-day work? So what am I expected to do? How am I expected to progress? What happens if I find issues? How do they get resolved? So whether I find something or I get a ticket, what is that workflow? How is that supposed to progress? How do I notify people that it's been, that I think it's fixed, that it's ready to be tested? How do those things actually get resolved? Understanding, essentially, how do I move again from A to Z is how do I get these things implemented? How do I get them fixed? How do I get them verified? How do I get them pushed out to my users? Which all goes to that last item of how do I let them know and what does done mean? Whenever I get, in quotes, done with my task, what does that mean? Does that mean it's just coded? Does that mean that it's been coded and it's gone through some sort of code review? Does that mean that there's some testing included? Does that mean that it was verified? Does that mean somebody had to sign off on it? What is done? And make sure that you've got that understood so that you can actually mark out your schedule, that you can, so it can make sense. So because if I say done is one thing and you say done is something else, then regardless, our schedules are not going to match up. We can say, if I say done on next Monday and you say done on next Monday, we're actually not at the same place because we have different definitions of done. So once you've got all of this put together, as simple as this may have seemed, and it's a long list, but it is actually something that can be done very quickly. A lot of that stuff you can sort of check off sometimes within minutes or hours. Sometimes it may take you days, weeks, or even months to get sort of to the point of, okay, let's actually start moving forward. Sometimes a ramp up can be rather lengthy. Once you've got your first build, I always like the first step is just start simple. Something, like I'm building it and I've got some small change. Usually you want something that's visual. So it may be it may be as simple as like a text change, maybe some sort of common calculation that you make a slight variation to it. The best thing is actually to do it from a task that's out there. Find the simplest, easiest, smallest scope task you can find and do that, so that you've actually gone through the whole process of, let's say, like selecting a problem ticket, working it, committing the changes, going through that whole process, whatever it happens to be, if it includes code review and testing and those kind of things, so that you can, know that you've done it and kept it as simple as possible. So you've have as few variations and variables that you need to worry about. I cannot emphasize enough, as you're going through this, make sure you've got your debugger set up. And maybe it's just me, but it's one of those things that it's like, until I have a debugger set up, life is just painful. It is so slow going through stuff until you've got a really good debugging environment set up, so that you can actually make the change. You can figure out what's going on. You can see what code and what values are assigned where, and actually be productive in your implementation. As part of this, like I said, test it, commit it, whatever. If there's a code review cycle, go through all of those with this small change. Early on, communicate. It's better to over communicate early and have people say, hey, you don't need to tell us that much, and then back off of it, versus doing stuff and people say, hey, we didn't hear from you at all. So early on, you want to be, small steps, communicate, sort of like, hey, I took a step. Is this good? Let's get some verification. Let's make sure we're on the right page. And you can go slow. You want to make sure that you get those verifications. And if anybody asks, it's basically, the answer is, hey, I want to make sure I understand the processes and the procedures and the expectations, so that I can nail those, because once we start going, I'm going to be like, I want to be very productive. I want to be moving through this stuff, and I don't want the process to hold me back, and I don't want to break the process somehow. I don't want to make, I don't want to learn bad habits early on. I want to get my good habits in early on when they're easy to create, and then I don't have to, break bad habits down the road. Don't be afraid of ignorance. This is something I think we lose after. I think we have it a lot of times, usually when you're entry level in a job. But once you get beyond that, I think we start to fear saying, I don't know, or asking questions. Especially early on, do not do that. Don't get yourself in a situation where you're assuming things, where you're sort of going with what you did at your last job or things like that. If there's any questions, ask. And I myself, I actually will plead ignorance on a regular basis. I'll say, hey, I'm sorry. I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but please pardon my ignorance for a little bit. I don't understand this yet. I haven't been told this. I want to make sure I get this stuff, and I want to make sure I'm clear on it, so that I don't make wrong assumptions. Don't be afraid of doing that. It is expected. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, even at that point with pleading ignorance, one of the ways that I kind of, I don't want to say hide, but showing my ignorance, but also just showing that I'm trying to work with rehashing. Whenever someone comes up to me with a problem, just rehash it to them. Hey, let me say this over to you again, so I understand what you're saying, that the problem that I'm about to try to solve as well. That's helped me in my ignorance with magazines, just rehashing the problem to the people.
That is for me, I found that has worked really well, is that it's the old practice of somebody tells you something and then you tell it back to them in your own words. I do that a lot, and I've had some that just recently I had one where there's three of us and listening to somebody, and I was sort of taking that. I said, okay, so I think this is what you said. And it was pretty funny because I set it back, and the three other people each had individual, completely different ideas of what it was. They're like, no, that's not what I got. No, that's not what I got. And as we talked to each other, it was everybody had a very different point of view, and it turned out to be very valuable because we could have lost a lot of time if we had all gone off and said, okay, I think we got it, as opposed to just going through that exercise. Sometimes it's just it's language and terminology, but sometimes it is there's some fundamental things that you don't understand. And that's a good lead into the next little bullet point I got here is do regular check-ins with the business users, the people that are decision makers, things like that. It is very good to say it's sort of the opposite of saying are we there yet, but it's more of a, hey, are we still on track? Are we still on the same page? The more you can do that, the less likely you are to have to make a big correction, because you're sort of making these micro corrections along the way. As you're moving forward, also make sure you spend some time outside of the just technical side of stuff. If you really want to become better and more valuable to your customers, to your company, to advance your career, understand the industry you're working in. Spend some time looking at maybe the magazines or listening to podcasts or reading blogs that are related to whatever their focus is, because that's going to help you understand those business users better. It's going to help you bridge the gap between technology and business, and it's going to help you help them. You're going to be reading some of this stuff, you're going to be learning these things, and in doing so, you're going to understand the problems that are faced. You're sitting there in the technology every day, and it makes it more likely that you're going to get that perfect storm of you being able to say, oh, this technology is out there and this problem needs to be solved. And you know what? We can make those things, we can combine those two, and suddenly maybe it could be a game changer for the industry. You never know. So, you want to do that. You want to be able to communicate in the language and focused on the kinds of issues that the business users are going to focus on. Don't be afraid to utilize any training or conferences that are available. This is a hard thing to do sometimes for developers, because particularly again in that, what your roles and your view of your role are, a lot of times you get into the mode of, it's like, my benefit to the company is writing code. If I'm not writing code, then I'm not productive. But training and conferences can be very productive. It's sort of that idea of understanding the business better, but also it's just a way to step out of your normal routine and avoid getting into a rut. Allow you to expand your horizon. It's going to help your career, help you build some contacts, and maybe see some different approaches or even best practices of solving whatever problems that you work with on a daily basis. Finally, as you're moving forward from that A to Z, always the best way you can help everybody out, including yourself, is look for, just on a daily basis, sort of take a glance at stuff and see if there's any ways that you can improve what you're doing. The most obvious, to me, the most obvious way to do that kind of stuff is automation. So if you've got a task or a series of tasks that you do like every day or every week, once you're doing anything, once you've repeated things more than about 3 or 4 times, put an eye on it a little bit, spend a little time, maybe just consider it through a lunch break one day or something like that. Is there a way to automate this? Is there a way that I can make this thing not take as much time or reduce manual input, things like that? Whether it's very simple scripts or maybe something more complex, keep an eye out for that kind of stuff. Because ideally what you want to end up doing is, in most cases, from a technology point of view, if you've really aced your job, you've essentially eliminated your position by the time you're done with it. You've been able to, whether it's solved all the problems that need to be solved or pushed all the tickets through or automated all of the manual processes, whatever it happens to be, that's really ideally that's what you're working towards, is that you've eliminated your original job, and usually as part of that you end up creating a whole different job. maybe there was a job before where there's a whole lot of manual data entry. Well, if you've gone through and automated it through feeds and exports and reporting, well then, now instead of having to do all that manual data, that same resource can actually be really analyzing the data, and analyzing the reports. Or maybe they're going to be able to spend more time finding new features or selling to customers or providing them better support, things like that. Slow and steady wins the race is the best thing to think about when you're coming into a new job. Whether it's like a limited lifespan of say 3 months or 6 months, something like that, or it's, hey, I'm an employee and I may be here for decades. You don't have to win it all. You don't have to know it all and be a master of it in a week or a month. Walk through everything, nail the processes, make sure you understand what needs to be done. Master it. That should be your steady mantra. Is, if I don't know this completely, if I have questions, and I'm going to start working my way through my list of questions. I want to make sure I understand what needs to be done, why it's done, and how we can do it better. Master the environment, understand where all of the skeletons are buried. These days it becomes harder and harder because you've got all of these, the cloud applications and the desktop applications and the configurations, and this data goes here and that data goes there, and you get these bifurcated systems where you've got, like, there's a PHP app over there and a Java app over there and a Salesforce thing that's integrated, and Great Plains is over there, and figure it all out. It's one of those things is you need to understand. Somebody needs to understand it, so might as well be you, because if you do, you're going to provide a valuable resource to your company. That's going to mean they're going to want to keep you. They're going to advance you, and even if they don't, or if the company goes out of business or whatever, you can take all of that where you go next. That is going to be the best way to really advance your career, is always being super valuable to whoever you're working with. And this goes to understand, like, don't get focused on, hey, it's not my job or something like that. Is understand the whole system. You need to know, obviously, whatever your role is and your piece and how it integrates with other stuff. But the further you can understand those and how those things integrate, and whatever the big system is, the big picture is, it's going to help you, because then you're going to be able to understand where the module or the section that you're working on, whether it's doing what it really needs to do, or is it maybe doing some stuff it doesn't need to. Maybe somehow this piece of code you're working on, somebody somewhere else dictated how it was supposed to be done. And as you look at the whole system, you say, you know what, this doesn't really need to be done this way. Or maybe this is redundant from this other thing over there. Why don't we combine these two, save ourselves some problems, speed the whole system up. As always, under promise and over deliver. As you're figuring out all of this, you should always have an eye to, whatever the goals are, how can I beat that? If I'm supposed to have a release done by the end of the month, how can I have it, 3 days early? Or how can I, find some extra features that make sense, that are useful to the users, and maybe try to work those in. That is going to it's going to help your career, but more importantly, that I think is one of the biggest ways to reduce your stress. Is if you're always ahead of the game, if you always feel like you're ahead of the game, it's going to reduce your stress. If you always feel that you're behind, for 99% of the people, that is going to add to your stress. That's going to cause you to stress out. You're going to say, man, I'm working my butt off and I'm behind schedule and I've got all this stuff and yada, yada, yada. It's just stress versus, hey, I'm knocking this stuff out. We're getting things done. We're adding some features in. That's positive stress. That's, you're able to pat yourself on the back, and you get wins versus feeling like you're getting losses. Bottom line, when you come into a new situation, people do not expect you to know it all immediately. That's like the biggest rookie mistake I think that I see, is that when people come in and they're like, oh yeah, I got it all. It's like, you can't. Doesn't matter how long you've been doing this. There's always new players and new positions and new processes and procedures. And there's stuff that's new. So people are always going to expect you to ramp up to a position. They may push you, to do it quickly, but there's always some sort of ramp up time, and take advantage of that. Make sure that while you're doing that ramp up, you ramp up as much as possible, so that sort of think of it as like going onto the interstate when you're on a ramp, an entrance ramp on an interstate. If they're going 100 miles an hour, let's make sure that when you hit the interstate, you're going 100 miles an hour. You don't want to be going 20 miles an hour. You probably don't want to be going 120 either, but hey, if you're going 105, other than speed limit issues and stuff like that, that's probably not a bad thing. If you can hit the interstate running, if you can be essentially setting the pace, even better. As you come into this stuff, I think in IT too often we think of our silos and what we need to do, but really with any position anywhere, the biggest value you can bring to a company is if your presence there makes the team better. And if you think of like superstars in sports, that's, it's always a very obvious way. To me, it's a very obvious analogy. If you look at like Michael Jordan, yeah, he was awesome, but look at the people around him, and they were better when they were on his team. You look at like Wayne Gretzky, the people that play with him, they were better when they were on his team. That's what you want to be. You want to be the guy or the gal that when you walk into a company, they are like, man, we were okay, but when Timothy joined us, suddenly everybody was like, he helped us do our jobs better. That's what you want to be. And you need to focus. One of the best ways to do that is focus on being a team player. Again, if Michael Jordan had just worried about, himself, if he was just like, I got to help my stats, I got to improve my free throws, I got to do that, he would not have been the same person. And you look at that, and yes, these people that are superstars were highly skilled, highly talented. But if you look at it, their focus was not on themselves being highly skilled and highly talented. Their focus was really on winning, on being, making the team better. And of course, as part of that, they make themselves better because they don't want to be the weak link, things like that. So you want to come into these situations. The more that you're drawing other people in, and making sure that you're communicating and that people understand that you want them to be a part of it, the more likelihood that you're going to be successful. That's just it's part of human nature. We've gotten through all of this, and let's take a brief look at what about the other side of it. Okay, I'm leaving my job, or I'm retiring or quitting, or somebody else coming in or whatever. How do I make it easier for the next guy? Which is one of the things you always want to be able to do. Embrace your standards wherever possible. And again, that under promise and over deliver, do that on your standards. Make sure that your documentation, your comments, those kinds of things that you have stuff that is, you look at and you say, man, this is exactly what I would love to have. This is what would help me really speed up that ramp up period, allow me to hit the ground running instead of having to really dig through a bunch of stuff. That automation I talked about, automate where possible. Make sure that including like your testing and your build scripts and those kind of things, all of those and configuration scripts, all the things that are a headache when you come into a new job, make sure you've documented that. If you can, make sure you automate that. And of course, where you've automated it, make sure the automation includes documentation enough so it's not some black box magic process where they come in and say, well, there's a build script and it does a billion things, but don't touch it because I don't really get what it does. I just know that I have to run that script in order for everything to work. That can be nice, but if anything breaks on it, or if anybody ever has to look underneath the covers, you want to be able to figure out where everything is within that script or that automated process. Where you can, because we're talking about automation and scripting and some things like that, try to avoid the scattering of technology that we often see. If you've got, if you're say you're in a Microsoft environment, don't write a bunch of Java applications to do your automation. If you're in a Windows environment, don't make them jump over to a Linux, or if you're in Linux, don't write a bunch of Windows, like DOS batch scripts to do your stuff. Some of these things, you can't. It's like you can't live in a Linux environment and write DOS batch for the most part. You're going to be challenged to get any of that kind of stuff done. But with scripting languages, that it is easy to, like, I could write Ant stuff to do a bunch of build, or I could write DOS batch, or I could write shell scripting, or I could do Maven, or I could do, it goes on and on. Pick the ones that are already there. Don't, if it hasn't been done, then try to do something that pretty much goes hand in hand with the technologies that exist, where it makes sense. But like if you're in a .NET shop and you need to do something command line and there's no command line apps, okay, let's do them in, say, C# for .NET command line stuff versus writing a command line, like I said, in maybe in Java or C or C++, something like that. Try to limit the amount of technologies that people need to use. It is fun for us to go out and learn a new technology as we're solving these problems, but that can make it really difficult for the next guy or gal. That'll do it for this one. As always, thanks for joining me on this journey as we've struggled through this. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, requests for maybe follow-ups and things like that, as always, you can go to info@developernerd.com, contact us on the site. Join bring it up in one of the mentor sessions that we have. Love to just keep moving on this kind of stuff. This topic in particular is one of those that I know it's not necessarily common. Usually this is, if you move to 10 jobs in your life, probably 5 or 6 of them are not going to have these problems at all. 1 or 2 are going to be, you're really going to have to live with this, and the other 2 are going to be not too bad. But it's one of those things that it's easy to get caught in our day-to-day coding routines, and sometimes we got to pick our heads up and look at the forest and the big picture and figure out that how can we do this in a way that makes it easier on the next person, and how can we do what we've done a little bit better. And that goes to, of course, our goal, making better developers everywhere, all the time, whatever your level is. That's the only way. That's the nice thing, is better is very generic. So whatever you did yesterday, let's just try to do it a little better today, and let's try to move forward. And if nothing else, keep up with the technology, which we know changes every day. That will take us to the questions and answer portion of our thing here. So anybody, I'll open up any questions or answers, or actually I guess I'll work on the answers. Questions or comments?
How long does it take, like, an experienced developer to pretty much master and begin coding confidently within, like, a specific environment? And another one, the last one probably is, when do you think, like, for instance, you talked about ignorant, like being ignorant and keep asking questions. When do you think, like, for instance, if your trainee is that person who has, like, an ego, like you come ask him, he's like, oh, you don't know this? Maybe you came in as a senior developer, but you're still trying to master the thing, but you're asking a lot of questions. When do you think, like, what, enough is enough, maybe I need to go Google this myself, because I don't want to mess with this development manager, because anytime I go in here, he's giving me an attitude, although he's giving me an answer.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I'll take your second question first. I think you always want to do a little bit of research beforehand where you can. I'm thinking this is more like internal kind of stuff where you probably aren't going to be able to Google it. But if you've got documentation, then utilize it. That's sort of, I guess that was sort of an assumption there, is if there's stuff that's documented and there's training, and that is, utilize that, make use of that, so that your questions are, we'll say, intelligent questions. And people may get annoyed by, it's that pleading ignorance, is it may be something where they may be annoyed. It's like, man, this guy is just wearing me out. But if it's legitimate stuff where it's like, hey, we don't have this anywhere. Where is this documented? Then I think they're usually going to respect that, and they're going to be they're going to roll with it essentially. And the key to all that is really is if you go to ask somebody and you get an answer, make sure that you absorb that and learn it, because usually the issue is not asking questions. It's if you ask the same question over and over again, and it's like if you're not getting it, that's where it may be a bit of a challenge. And usually with this kind of case, it's implementation specific questions more that we're getting in, that we're talking about. Now you may be asking questions about technology, but these are the kind of things that you're sort of expected to not know.
Okay.
And then the first part of your question there, the ramp up time varies a lot. Typically, it's sort of just like broad brush. Typically, you're going to look at about 3 to 6 months to get ramped up to wherever you're at, because you got to learn the processes and procedures and the business and the players and how they've done stuff. Usually, if you go beyond, and sometimes it's some places it's going to take it takes a year or maybe even a little more, just because of the breadth of stuff they cover. So I think usually within that first 3 months is almost like a honeymoon kind of period where you can really ask whatever you want and be almost obnoxious and bugging people about learning information and really trying to absorb it. And if you do those right, that's one of the best ways that you can be a win to a customer or that new job, is that you ramp up a little bit faster. Yeah, it may be more intense. There may be a little bit of a drinking from the fire hose kind of thing, but if you can be really ramped up and highly productive within 3 months in just about any position, if you can nail that, then you're going to be ahead of the curve. And I can't think of any position I've been in where, if I'm up to speed and really productive in a 3 or 4 month time period, that they're absolutely ecstatic about it, because they just assume, like I said, there's always the assumption in that first week or two that you're just getting your feet underneath you and you're getting some stuff going. And if you can actually be productive and really advancing ideas within the company and that's not to say that you're not like writing code and committing stuff maybe in the first week or two. I'm talking like really contributing to the to the vision, direction of the application and truly understanding it. All right, other questions or comments, follow-ups?
No, speaking of that, like getting pretty much like maybe being confident within 3 for 6 months, like what would companies, like, let me say, hire developers on like contract basis, like, oh, this is a 3 month contract or 6 months, and yet there is a period of training whereby maybe a developer might eat like at least a month or 2 weeks to learn the code and get into, and then maybe 6 months you get rid of him, or 3 months you are like, okay, this is what we wanted him to do.
That's actually a really good point. I think that's a topic I think I'm going to have to add to discuss at one point, because there's definitely an art to utilizing contractors, and there is I guess there's a science to it as well. Part of the thing with especially like a short-term thing, the 3 to 6 month kind of time frame, usually that's very tightly defined. So the whole expectation is for that consultant to not learn anything outside of a very small portion of what they're doing. And that's where, as a consultant, if you can expand beyond that, if you can understand some of that other stuff, that's a value add that you're going to bring. But especially if there's small, like 1 to 3 month projects, a lot of companies, that's why you see them embracing things like virtual machines and virtual development environments and things like that, so that they can find ways to help ramp developers up faster. And there's a lot of like just-in-time resources and flex options that consulting companies are working with, where it's basically people sort of like, flex in and out very quickly, very short-term stuff to come in, do some tasks, and be done with it. The key to that is eliminating a lot of the stuff that you need to ramp up to. So it's highly documented, highly configured, highly automated processes so that you can jump in. And it's also really almost like a laser beam focus on the skill sets that you're bringing in, because you want to make sure that they know exactly the kind of skills, exactly the kind of problems you're trying to solve. Because if you ramp up, if you've got a 1-month project and it takes you a week and a half to ramp up to it, then you're useless. I just had a discussion with a client today and yesterday talking about that same kind of thing, where we're looking at bringing in a low-cost resource to do some work, but we really can't, because the time it would take to ramp them up would end up, it change all of our target dates, and it would end up actually costing as much as it does to just keep the current higher cost resources.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
I had an interest. I liked how you were pointing out, if you're in a Microsoft shop, stay with Microsoft. Don't introduce new technologies that may not necessarily be necessary. This may be for a future topic, but I had a discussion this week with an old friend about technologies and trying to hire new developers. And it's like languages like .NET and Java aren't real sexy to new developers anymore. They're always chasing that next new thing. Like, Python was hot for a little while, and now it's like Ruby and Groovy and all these other new technologies. But at the end of the day, most enterprise shops still go back to either .NET or Java. So when working in these environments, when should you and shouldn't you look at like some of the newer languages that are out there that might benefit or might help improve what you're working on?
Yeah, it's at least a podcast, if not a presentation of a topic. We've talked about a little bit. We've even got, I think, some blog posts that sort of hit on that. I may have done it more on the RB Consulting side as opposed to the Developerpreneur blog posts. But the short answer to that, and the sort of snarky answer almost, is that I don't know that ever exists. I don't know that there's, for a lot of these technologies, and particularly the ones that are like the general purpose languages, like your Javas and your C Sharps, and actually, Python can do that as well, and even Ruby. But once it's once that language is there, changing away from it, I honestly don't see it as, I don't know. I don't know that I've ever seen it actually make sense. The exceptions are if there's if something's dying, or if it's if it's some sort of proprietary thing, like if it was like Power Builder. That was one that's, I guess it's still big in some places, but something like that, where if it's just not, it's too hard to find the skills, or it's too expensive to find the people to do that kind of work. Okay, that may be a reason to move. Or if you're on a platform, if you're on some sort of, the general purpose languages, I don't think you're going to run into this. But if you're in a situation where what you're building in won't solve your problem, it won't do what you need it to do, then you would need to get off of that. But it's like, you may not be able to do something in C#, but maybe I can because I know it, and vice versa. Like maybe I can't do something in Java, but if I found the right person, they could. It's not the Java problem, it's the developer problem in that case. It's the problems at the keyboard and not in the computer kind of thing. I think really it's with learning the new stuff. That's where you almost, I've gotten older and looked at more and more shops that have done this, and I've been guilty of this. I have introduced languages and stuff where I really probably looking back probably shouldn't have, because it basically added complexity to the system. Now, if you're just like, if everything in the company you're at is PHP, and you go in and say, oh wait, we've got some extra scripts we need to do, or we've got some extra applications we need to do that need to be cross-platform, and I know Java, I want to write them in Java. And so you're going from essentially one language to two, it's not as big a deal. But if you already got 3 or 4 languages there and you're adding the 5th, the 6th, the 17th, you need to reevaluate that. You don't need to do that. For the people that want to do the new stuff, that's the biggest problem, is that you got to, the younger guys, the people that knew this stuff, it's like, dude, you got to spend your time. You got to put your time in. You got to work for the man for a while, as they say, and sort of just, go with it. If you want to learn this other stuff, get a side hustle, do a little side project. We've talked about that, particularly in the last, few weeks. We've had a couple times we've talked about learning new languages and expanding your own quiver of options. Is you sort of need to do it on your own. If you do get to a point where you have something that is that you see some like true business value to change gears and go that direction, then you really need to walk through, like, essentially, talk to the key decision makers and put together a proposal and walk it through that. Like I said, I can see that if you're on a platform, if you're, if you're Salesforce and you say, we could go to NetSuite and it would do better, or we could cut a lot of costs, or we could, save a lot of effort, or things like that. Okay, those are the kinds of things I see it more often than I do. If you're a Java shop and you're moving to, like, for example, let's just theoretically say that a CEO comes into a company where there's a Java shop, but he thinks that PHP is the way to go. To cut to the chase, that's just butt stupid. It's like, you already have the resources, you already have the technology, you already have the core. You're going to have to rewrite everything. You're going to have to re-educate or retrain or rehire, or throw out everybody that you've got and get a new team, and you lose all the intellectual property involved in that. I mean, it really doesn't make sense unless what you're doing just doesn't work for you. Unless it's somewhere it's just like you look at it and the cost of dealing with that is too much. And usually the reason is going to be, a good example is Timothy's got his PHP app he wrote. He's moving it into Spring and into Java, and part of that is just because his knowledge, his comfort. Part of it is that what Java provides over what PHP provides, but also part of it, I think, is his comfort and his ability to create enterprise software is stronger in the Java environment. And in this case, it's just him. It's like you have to think of it as like, if he was a team, he'd probably be a team that was majority Java developers anyways. And so then you look at it, you say, okay, you're sort of, you're going to your strength at that point. If you're a team if you've got a development team that's 100% one language, and you're trying to go to a new one, I don't see that ever being viable. If you're trying to extend, so if you're trying to go from, let's say you're a straight up HTML, CSS, JavaScript on the front end, and now you want to add Bootstrap or Angular or React or one of those kind of things, or jQuery, or any of those kind of things, that is a little bit of a different step. Is really, to me, that's like a growth and not necessarily a new technology. Adding a framework, adding a library, that's a little different. You still want to do the sort of the return on investment, the cost evaluation of it is, does this make sense? Does this help us? Is this something that other people can learn? Would it make sense for them to learn it? Is this going to help our application and get things done better and maybe reduce the cost of maintaining it? Or is this some new boutique language that if we go to this route, that's going to add $50 an hour in every contractor that we bring in from here on out? There's a lot of considerations to go into it. The short answer, like I said, though, is don't. It's like, if you want to go learn it, Usually you need to learn it on your own. The exceptions are really where you're taking where you're taking things and you're replacing them with something that's maybe going from like 2 technologies to 1, or 3 technologies to 1, or where you're taking something that sort of exists and you're building on top of that to where it's not really a new technology, it's a technology transition, if that makes sense. Was that a long-winded good answer to your question?
Yeah, I mean that answers the question. We had probably about a 30-minute debate about it, and I was just curious on your take.
Yeah, that's I have seen that a lot, and I've honestly almost made a living on coming in and cleaning up after places where they've got a technology, somebody comes in, they create a new they've got a new technology, they create it, somebody else comes in and they've got another one, and the next thing you know, you've got this mess, which honestly, that's exactly what Timothy's looking at right now. They've got 8 different systems and I don't know how many different technologies and all of this work made to try to make all those things work together, rather than just keep it as simple as possible. Yeah, that KISS method, keep it simple, Sam, or whatever you want to put for the other S. That is more important in technology and IT jobs, I think, than anything else. And yet, that's probably the biggest weakness we have as technicians, is that we want to go grab that shiny object, and that defeats its own purpose way too often.
Yeah, I unfortunately know the mess that Timothy's dealing with, and it definitely relates to that particular company, and a lot of companies, really. I mean, we're dealing with that right now where I'm at. They're talking about rewriting our core application, and they're talking about going to the extreme of like Angular and all, possibly REST and all this, latest and greatest stuff. When at the end of the day, all they really need to do is create some JSFs and servlets and reduce the number of, basically they're overcomplicating it by trying to simplify it. When really, if they just revisit what they have, just essentially do the design layout, they'll find that, I could probably get away with either MVC or hell, just a straight up HTML with Ajax. It just kills me where I walk into the meeting rooms and I see all these technologies and things they're throwing up on the board. It's like, why? It just kills me. For one, it's like, we've used Bootstrap before, and we're using custom CSS libraries. We're using this, we're using that. And it's like, and every other release, we have an issue where browser updates and, we're having problems with resolutions, or the reactive piece when the page resizes isn't populating correctly. We are having overlap. It's like, use Bootstrap. Use one of these predefined CSS libraries. Quit using your predefined. You don't need those anymore. Just subtle things like that. It's just, why?
Yep. Yeah, it's awesome if you're a consultant, because that means you're going to get to learn new technology, and you get to expand you're going to get a lot more billable hours. But it's bad as a company. We've talked about this a lot. Pick a direction and go. This is that A to Z kind of thing I'm thinking about. It's like, when you're going from point A to point B, the shortest is the most direct route. Well, if you're throwing all these technologies in, you are not going to get the most direct route. You're going to be on all these little rabbit trails, and it becomes a mess quickly. And even personal development, I've run into that where I've thrown too many technologies into projects, and I look at it, I'm like, why did I do that? Because then it's a pain to keep track of everything.